Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Savannah. I'm the Reverend Lisa Day. I'm the pastor here. We are so happy to have you all with us. Our speaker, I have to look up here to look at her, our panelists, and all of you are here to join the conversation. We will have a break partway through the morning. There are restrooms out this door, across the courtyard, and into the next building. And we have a reception planned after the conclusion of all of our speakers, and we have lots of food and coffee, and we are counting on each and every one of you coming to that because we planned food for many more people. So you can have your lunch here. Is there any other housekeeping? Please turn off your cell phones, silence them, put them in airplane mode, whatever you do to keep them from being a distraction. Let us pray. Sacred mystery of many names and beyond all naming, we gather this day as people of clear-eyed hope. Even as the doomsday clock ticks closer to midnight, even as the climate change-driven snow has barely melted, even as environmental protections are rolled back, one small part of a campaign to overwhelm, sow confusion, and demoralize us into inaction, even now we gather as people of clear-eyed hope. Hope rooted in our understanding that the interdependent web of all existence comprises us and we it. Hope rooted in the knowledge that wherever two or more are gathered in your name, their divine energy is released into the world. Hope rooted in our knowing that it is through our actions that the arc of the moral universe bends, however slowly, toward justice. Hope rooted in what we have been told, that your work springs forth from seeds planted and nourished in small, humble, and hidden places. Buoyed by these sources of hope, grateful to have been called into this conversation, hearts longing for a path forward, we pray for the capacity to be surprised, the willingness to be transformed, and the courage to become ourselves, Refugia. In all your many names. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Lisa. That was beautiful. And I welcome you all here today. I'm Kevin Ionno. I'm with the Green Team, the UU of Savannah Green Team. And Reverend Lisa already took away a couple of my announcements, so I can go straight to the introduction. I don't have to talk about the bathrooms or phones. Okay, so anyway, this would be the point in the program where I would introduce Debra by reading her bio, but in the program is the bio and you can read it yourself. I do want to point out there is a link to where you can purchase her book, and I highly recommend it. It's a beautifully written book. It's about nature, it's about climate change, ecology, theology, it's about hope, and it's well researched and it's written beautifully. But instead, I thought you would know more about Debra if I read a passage from her book instead of just reading her bio to you. So I'm going to take this moment to read this passage from her book. Did I take the bookmark out and forget where it was? Let's see. I think I did. All right. Pardon me here. There it is. Okay, so anyway, in this passage, she is at her family cottage on Lake Michigan, and she has a strong sense of place in her book because she's from Western Michigan. She writes about it a lot. But anyway, she's there alone because her other members of her family are elsewhere. And she's been staying up reading, and it's about midnight. She's going to go to bed. So I'm going to take it from there. After an evening by the fire with a book, I went to bed at midnight. A full moon hovered at the top of the curtainless bedroom window, still high in a violet sky. At the horizon, moonlight pooled on the lake's soothed, sable surface, setting shards of water glittering near the shore. I slept for a couple hours and woke again. Then the moon was lower, larger, laying down a long path of light on the water like a tunnel of time. I slept again and dreamed of the moon. Was I still dreaming when I watched the moon sink silently into the lake? Or was that real? Lingering summer evenings, moonshine on black winter nights. Always I see the light. I carry the light with me wherever I go, along with the feel of warm sand and the freedom song of a long horizon. The lakeshore is where my conscious love of place began. I know there are other beautiful places in the world far more spectacular than this stretch of shore with its undulating dunes and flowing beach grass, sumac, and wild grapevines, towering cottonwoods, generous oaks, and shaggy pines. I've seen a small sampling of the Earth's other more magnificent wonders, but a freshwater sea and sugar sand dunes awakened my heart, and so I carried that awakened heart back into town, past the cornfields and suburban housing developments, into the neighborhoods and parks and school campuses and commercial strips and highway overpasses and downtown office buildings and bridges over the river, into all the ordinary contours of this place where I live. I let this awakened heart carry me back to the memory of beech maple and oak hickory forest and oak savannas that covered this place, now long gone. I let my awakened heart carry me into an imagined future, a future this generation can dream into being, where people everywhere awaken again to the loveliness and possibility of this world. Debra Rienstra.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. Am I coming through? Is this okay? Can everybody hear me okay? What a beautiful introduction, and that prayer. My goodness, maybe we should just all go home at this point because that was just so lovely. Thank you so much. I'm really, really honored to be here and so grateful to the people at UU Savannah, Kevin, Lisa, the whole team. You've been so generous, so attentive to every detail, so kind in preparing this and so careful. So thank you for preparing this event with such care and intention. I look forward to the panel discussion. You've assembled these amazing people. So I hope this morning is going to be really special for those of you who've taken the time to come. So thank you. I'm going to talk for about 45 minutes as instructed, and then we'll take a little break. So what I'd like to do is spend a little time thinking about where we are, when we are, dwelling in that for a minute. I'm going to propose a metaphor that has been really helpful to me, and I hope will be helpful to you. We'll think a little bit about the vision of where we'd love to go, where we long to go with this world, and then I'll give you a bunch of examples of people kind of living out that metaphor, and then we'll think about where to start. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's give this a try. Okay. And now we're going to start from the beginning. And I think I'm doing this right. Can I get an acknowledgement that this is the right setting, just to make sure? Somebody let me know if this is working.
It looks good.
Okay, great. Just want to make sure. Thank you. All right. So the title of the talk, Refugia Faith, and I'll explain what that means. And the theme is ecological civilization, and in particular, the gifts that faith communities can bring to this moment. So this is our abiding question. This is the question we're dwelling on this morning. What is our role as people of faith and conscience in crisis times? So let's just dwell for a minute in the fact that we are living in crisis times. So we are thinking about the climate crisis, and I know that you folks in Georgia have just experienced a very rough time with number one on that list there, hurricanes. They're stronger, they're worse. In some ways, they're more frequent simply because storms that would have been hurricanes are now, or would not have been hurricanes, are now hurricanes. But you are aware of the other effects of the climate crisis that we and people all over the world are experiencing. That whole list there. And the scary ones to me are at the bottom. I mean, they're all scary, But the really troubling ones that people haven't, I think, quite come to grips with are crop failures and conflict and migration. And we are seeing that. We are definitely seeing that in the US, but very, very intensely elsewhere in the world. But that is not all. We are also very aware of other kinds of crisis that we're living through, particularly authoritarianism. That one is deeply on our minds and in our hearts right now. Racism, wealth inequality, trauma. We'll talk about that church decline and schism. But all this adds up to feeling like we are living at this crisis convergence. And it's stressful. You feel it every minute of every day, and even in the night. I don't know about you, but I wake up at night thinking about this. So we are living at this inflection point. And I think it's important to just recognize that and dwell for a moment in that. My colleague at Calvin University, James Smith, he's a philosopher, and he's written this beautiful book called How to Inhabit Time. And I think he has real wisdom about understanding that history changes. Yes, there's a kind of rhyme and repetition to history's cycles, but each time is unique. So dwelling in the time where you are and discerning what that means is difficult and absolutely vital work. So I've highlighted that little moment in the top quote. What we're trying to do here is understanding for this moment how to inherit our traditions of faith and what they mean in this moment. And Smith himself, he's an Augustinian. He loves St. Augustine. So he's always going to go back to Augustine. And he suggests a kind of historical Augustinianism, a graced temporality. And what he means by that is recognizing that God is working in this moment, probably in ways we can't always perceive. But our job, our invitation is to join in and be transformed in order to create transformation. And I think that's just a helpful reminder to recognize that we're living in unique times, and how to respond takes discernment. So as you know, religious people do not always behave well in a crisis. They have strategies. These are not abnormal to other people too, but religious people tend to take these stress reactions and frost them over with some metaphysical frosting to justify them. We've seen a lot of inflaming enmities in the United States these days, scapegoating, especially of vulnerable people, the age-old strategy. A lot of people talk in religious circles about, oh, if we can only go back to the good old days, but with the wisdom of discerning when we are, we know we can't do that. So one way to deal with this is to hide or pretend it's not happening, or just to feel useless. And I think all of this, these are fear reactions, but in the end, it's kind of a crisis of imagination. So we're really going to think about imagination for the next little while. Speaking of religious crisis, I'm a scholar of early modern British literature. That's what I was trained in graduate school. And you might wonder, like, what on earth does that have to do with climate change? Well, kind of nothing, except one thing I've been dwelling on lately is the 1550s to the 1650s in England was a time of enormous upheaval. People living during that time, everything was upset and changing every minute. And so there is this sense that, oh yeah, I've kind of been dwelling vicariously in a similar point in history, a lot of religious upheaval. There was certainly climate upheaval, nothing like what we're seeing now, but political upheaval, economic upheaval, everything was changing. Just fundamental ideologies were changing. And we're seeing that happen, in the US too. And one of the things we have to do discerning our moment is be aware of what's happening in religion in the US. And so this is a recent American religious landscape study by PRRI, which is a, sort of gold standard polling group. And one of the things I want to show you in this one is that giant pink piece of the pie. That represents people who are unaffiliated with any religious faith. And that has been growing quickly and enormously in the United States. The dark blue piece of the pie there, kind of at the top of the pie, that's white evangelical Protestants. And that's only 13% of the American population right now. The blue pie underneath that, that's white mainline evangelical or not evangelical Protestants. And then white Catholics are the 12%. So just to get a sense of the disproportion between the religion we read about in the news, the religious practices and thoughts and ideologies and ideas we read about in the news, and the actual population. And by the way, Unitarian Universalists are this teeny tiny little little bit on there. There's a little piece of the pie for Unitarians there. No surprise there, I'm sure. But one of the results of this shifting religious landscape in the US and the rise of these authoritarian and, I would say anti-Christian ideologies is what Shane Claiborne calls a collision of two Christianities. And he just wrote an article about that just last week. And, the Christian nationalism that we're seeing on the rise here is a kind of empire faith. It's about domination. It is about control and coercion. And Shane Claiborne's argument, and I think this is absolutely right, is that this is absolutely the opposite of what Christianity stands for, and indeed all religious faith. So I think our question very specifically is, how do we resist? How do we refuse the cruelty and ruthlessness that's on the rise here, especially when we feel overpowered? And I think one of the things we have to recognize as we discern what's going on today is the power of the impulse toward domination. And here's where I think religion and the way we relate to the earth, to the rest of creation, those two things come together under this heading of domination. So if we think about the long legacy of colonialism and slavery in this country, we recognize the willingness, even the gleeful purposefulness of dominating people and land, driven by hatred and violence. Those two things have gone together, and together they kind of make up what I've been thinking about as, empire behavior. Oh, by the way, that was the Cancer Alley in Louisiana, a sacrifice zone of people and land, if there ever was one. So dwelling in this moment, thinking and discerning about when we are, one of the things we can recognize about it is a time to ask the question again, how do we imagine our role in the larger community? And it might be changing. It might be changing. What is our role as religious people in this moment? So we might need actually a new metaphor. We do want to go back to our fundamental call as we think about our role, to love God, to love neighbor, to affirm the goodness of life itself and existence and being, to address suffering, and to resist that spirit of domination. So here's the metaphor I've been thinking about. What if we imagine ourselves as people of refugia? Okay, so now I have to explain what refugia means. So the way I explain this is the way that it was explained to me in this beautiful book by Kathleen Dean Moore. She's a philosopher and a nature writer. Highly recommend this book. It's a 2016 book, still very pertinent. Great Tide Rising. It's a moral philosophical examination of why we should take action on climate change. But she describes in 4 pages in the middle of this book, the eruption of Mount St. Helens in 1980, which if you were around in 1980, you probably remember this. Absolutely devastating, huge eruption. The mountain spewed ash for miles around. The force of the eruption just blew down the trees on the mountainside, and it was a moonscape. And biologists wondered, how long is it ever going to green up? And they projected that it was going to take decades, centuries to even begin to grow back at all. But lo and behold, 25 years after the eruption, much of the mountainside had greened up. And so the scientists went up there and tried to figure out what was going on. And what they realized is that there were little pockets of life that survived even under this layer of death ash. And they had a word for that. It was a word that existed in biology already, and the word was refugia. So here's the official biological definition: habitats that components of biodiversity retreat to, persist in, and can potentially expand from under changing environmental conditions. So they're basically nature's way of continuing life when there's a huge disturbance. They're places where capacities of life rebuild and where nature, if all goes well, renews itself through disturbance. So there's a whole field of refugia conservation biology, and the idea is to look at places where disturbance has taken place and figure out why some pockets survive and some don't. So what you're seeing here are images of places after a fire, places after a drought, and places after an insect infestation. And you'll notice there's lots of death, but there's little pockets of green. And so the challenge in conservation biology is to figure out why. Is it the positioning? Is it the presence of water? Is it the DNA of the plants? And then use that knowledge to create management practices. So to sum up, refugia in nature are especially meaningful because amid disturbance, they provide little places of relative protection where things can be transformed. They grow by connection. And if all goes well, they can revive an ecosystem. But it's all very particular to place and time and the species we're talking about. Okay. So when I read those 4 pages in the middle of that book, I just thought, metaphor, right? Because as an English professor, you think about metaphors all the time. And I started thinking about the scriptures, the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament in particular for me. And it just occurred to me that the Hebrew scriptures and the New Testament too are full of these refugia places in nature, but also among people. And it just occurred to me that this is how God seems to love to work, through the small, the hidden, the inconsequential, the remnant. So if you think about some of those Hebrew Bible stories, Noah's Ark, for example, or even Abraham's family, God chooses Abraham's little, unimportant family to become a blessing to all the nations. The Israelites in the desert, they're an unimportant people, and yet God chooses them. Jesus and his disciples, Jesus doesn't come with an army. He comes with a few people that might even seem unqualified. And it's that small place. Even Jesus' parable, seeds, yeast, this seems to be how God loves to work. So if this moment demands of us mitigation of all these crises and adaptation to the things that we can't change is in terms of climate, how do we become these resilient healers? And I think maybe one way to think about this is to think of ourselves as the people of refugia who find and nurture, maybe even create refugia spaces in the earth, absolutely, but also in our human cultural systems and in our spiritual communities. So this is a concept I learned about recently, just a couple weeks ago, advanced regeneration. And this one has sort of been helping me make it through the last 2 weeks as I think ahead to what are we going to do in the next 4 years. So advanced regeneration is sort of a variation on the refugia idea. And it describes the way that seedlings grow in a forest, a hardwood forest like this. These are maple seedlings, which we know and love in Michigan here. And often maples will produce a lot of seedlings, and the seedlings will germinate and grow, but they might stay small in the understory for years because they're not getting enough light to grow big. But when an older tree, a big tree, falls over or whatever happens, a storm comes through and the canopy opens up and those little seedlings get light, they sprout and they grow really fast. So they stay small for as long as they need to, but they're ready for disturbance. And I thought, that's actually really helpful. So it helps think about how even small refugia can be ready to renew and grow and connect when the time comes. So that's the metaphor. So let's think now about our goal. What is our vision? What are we headed for? And the term that's being thrown around a little bit, there's different ways of describing this, but one term that I think is helpful is ecological civilization. We are aiming for an ecological civilization. Maybe you've heard the term Anthropocene, which has been kind of established as a way to describe how much power human beings have now. We are so many and so powerful that we have altered everything on Earth. The climate we have altered. So the Anthropocene era is what we have entered. But where are we going? And people, especially Thomas Berry and others, have thought about this idea of envisioning an ecological civilization. Thomas Berry called it an ecozoic era. So there's different ways to think about this. And one is the practical way. So what do we mean by an ecological civilization? And there's a lot of sort of practical considerations for this. And I would highly recommend Kate Raworth's book, Donut Economics, if you haven't read this book, 2017. She's an economist, obviously, British economist. And she has proposed that we have gotten stuck in this idea of the up and to the right growth chart economically. And she explains why that happens. And what that has led us to is overshoot. In other words, we have grown so much, we have used so many of the Earth's resources that we have overshot the Earth's ability to heal itself. So the way we've heated the atmosphere is one example of that, but there are others. You can maybe make out some details of this slide. And she suggests that we don't want to just keep growing. Obviously, that's just self-destructive. So what do we want? So she came up with this image of the donut. And inside the donut is a shortfall, so poverty and insufficiency. Outside the donut is overshoot. So that beautiful green area, the actual donut itself, is where we want to land. So that's a sort of practical economic way to think about ecological civilization, keeping within the bounds of the Earth's carrying capacity with our economic systems. So that would entail a kind of practical list for what we can do. And obviously religious people are and can help with all of these things. Here's our list for climate mitigation and adaptation. Got to reduce fossil fuel use, burning things for energy. That's what's heating up the planet. So phase out fossil fuels and transition to clean energy. Reverse biodiversity loss. This is a very important task for refugia in nature. Also reform our land use practices and policies. Agriculture is a huge contributor to climate change because of the way that soils, rich and healthy soils, do sequester carbon, and the way that we deforest gets rid of carbon sequesters, the trees, and also in the process of deforestation, we release a lot of carbon. We have to prepare for extreme weather events. We have to transition, as we were just saying, to more circular economies that reduce waste. And we have to do it all justly, equitably, and fast. So that's the practical list, and it's overwhelming, but all of these solutions are possible. We know how to do them. However, all of this can only happen if there's a deeper spiritual transformation needed. And so I've been trying to think about how to articulate this. I'm not the only one, of course. Many people are talking about this. I think Pope Francis's Laudato Si encyclical from 2015 is a really good example of thinking about this deeper spiritual transformation. But it's really important to name it. So here's just a few ways we can name this. We have to move from selfishness to a sense of the common good. And we have lost that in the United States for lots of reasons that sociologists talk about. And we are certainly not getting an example of this or leadership in this right now from the federal government. So from selfishness to common good, from domination and violence to kindness and generosity. And then from anthropocentrism, this is more of an ideological or theological point, to kinship and reciprocity with the natural world. So maybe some of you recognize those two words from Robin Wall Kimmerer, kinship and reciprocity. She has brought those beautifully to the top of our consciousness. And these are deep spiritual transformations. And here's where, as people of faith, maybe this is our role. Not that we aren't doing the practical things too, but to contribute, to help people, to have leadership in these deeper spiritual transformations. So we've seen this, we are seeing this happen. Mary Evelyn Tucker is a religion scholar at Yale, and she is part of this Yale climate group, Yale Religion and Ecology Forum. They've done amazing work since the 90s, sort of helping the world religions. She's an Asian religion expert, helping world religions get in touch with their resources for these kinds of transformations. The resources already in their traditions. And Pope Francis, this is a quotation from Laudato Si. And what is so important in this quotation is that doubling of the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, which is Pope Francis's abiding concern, has always been for the poor. And so here again, we're seeing the connection between people and land, between economics and ecology. So as faith communities, let's think a little bit about what gifts we can bring to this moment that will be part of that spiritual transformation. So here's a few that I thought of, and maybe you could think of dozens more. I'm certainly in the process of kind of gathering ideas around this. I'm working on a next book that I think will be called Refugia Church, which will be more about doing this work as communities. I think Refugia Faith is a little bit more individual. It's about sort of memoir-y individual journey toward this awakening. But there is a little bit different twist to it when you're talking about communities. So here are a few things I've been thinking about, and I would love to discuss this with you when we are in our discussion time today. But here's a couple things that I think we can focus on for now. So meaning making and ritual as a part of that. And then skills at long haul community. People of faith tend to have a lot of experience with long haul community, intergenerational community too, and that's very important. Now you might be thinking, oh yeah, we're great at community. We're always fighting. Yeah, I know. Believe me, I know. But we also have skills. And then mutual aid networks. Faith communities tend to be really good at mutual aid networks. We don't necessarily call it that, but that's the sort of the term of art right now. And we also have people with practical skills. So I want to think about maybe using these basic sort of principles to think about what we could offer. And then I'm going to show you some examples of people doing this. So our question is, how can we as communities of faith nurture these refugia practices in ways that serve others so that we become the people of refugia for others and not just whoever is quote unquote inside our communities? So let's think about meaning making a little bit. In a time of upheaval like this, people need spiritual depth. It's a time of anxiety and upheaval and suffering. Young people especially, I work with young people as a university professor every day, and they have a lot of anxiety and not a lot necessarily of equipment, sort of spiritual equipment to deal with that anxiety, or even knowledge to deal with that anxiety about what's happening. So to create a kind of sense of transcendence and a big narrative of meaning and hope is something that we have stewarded as faith communities, and people really need this right now. So faith itself, these big faith stories are very much needed right now. People need hope, and they need a sense of hope as not everything's going to be great, but hope as a vision of where we long to be and right action toward that vision, despite all the obstacles, despite the frustrations, despite the failures. So that meaning making is part of our role right now. So one of the tasks within that, I think, is to really double down in our practices, in our worship, in our prayers, in the way we operate, to renew our relationship with a more than human world. And there's many practical ways to do this. I'll show you in just a minute some examples. But to claim this task of reaffirming our kinship with fellow creatures, and to proclaim that we share our biological life with other creatures, and we share our belovedness in the Creator with these other creatures. So this is all a way of resisting this dominant anthropocentrism, people at the center of everything, of all meaning, of all purpose, of all domination. So resist that anthropocentrism, the disregard for the rest of creation, and our impulses to dominate. So, how do you share meaning? Well, there's lots of ways, and we can talk about that. But one way that I think we often overlook is our rituals, our ritual practices. So I've been thinking a lot about ritual theory. My husband happens to be a professor of preaching and worship, and he's done a lot of work in ritual theory. So to understand that our rituals are actually gifts that people need, because rituals are the way that we embody how we steward mystery, story, and symbol. And your rituals help us amid change and upheaval. So if you think about our, for example, threshold rituals, so birth rituals or marriage or death rituals, funerals that we have, memorial services, these are ways that we come to grips with moments of profound change and mystery. So rituals are powerful because they participate in transcendence in ways that are extra rational, right? Beyond our rationality. We can try to explain them, but we really can't. So that embodied practice is a way to help people sort of engage in meaning making together. Then I'll combine the other two that I suggested before. So community, our abilities with community, and our practical skills. So one of the things churches are dealing with right now is the fact that they actually have buildings and histories in communities. And some churches, are sort of more siloed off and isolated from their communities, but others have always been part of their communities. And that is a huge asset right now. Now, people who are on building committees might think, no, it's not. It's actually just a big pain, and we have a roof to fix. And, but that place and that history in communities is a huge asset right now as people seek community and meaning. Many churches also have a long tradition of speaking into public spaces with a moral witness and action toward justice and healing. So those are legacies that we can claim and double down on right now. And then, of course, our actual places that can be places of shelter or places where people can come to connect again to nature or to connect again to the transcendent. So those are actually gifts that we need to steward. And then, of course, we have people with tons of skills and experience. And so our question, I think, now is how can we build these networks of partnership with our communities in ways that aim toward these visions and goals? So here's some examples. This is one I really love. I haven't met Dr. Brown yet, but I hope to meet him soon by interviewing him. So this is Baltimore, Maryland. He is a pastor, and he was aware that people in his congregation kept getting sick from dietary reasons. So he was always in the hospital with his people. And there was a lot of diabetes. There was a lot of other heart disease, health related. And he realized his people weren't really eating well. And it had to do with food access and other reasons, environmental racism kinds of reasons. And so his church started a garden. They had this wonderful older woman in the church who was a good gardener. And they started this garden. And they started, selling or handing out the produce. And then that sort of one thing led to another. They had an after church farmers market thing going on. And then they realized, what we really need is a network. So you can see they created this little Refugia space. And then they started creating corridors to other Refugia spaces, other churches having gardens, and working with Black farmers up and down the East Coast to create a kind of farm to church table network that was both educational, it built community, and it improved health. And it was also, you know, beautiful. These beautiful garden spaces helped people reconnect with the earth too. Here's another example. This is one of my doctoral students who's getting a Doctor of Ministry at Western Theological Seminary, where I'm teaching with my husband as well. This is in Muskegon, Michigan. Dave is his name. He's a pastor at a church, a Reformed church there. And they undertook as a church this project to purchase a piece of really crappy land. This is it. It doesn't look terrible, but underneath that grass is garbage. So this was a garbage dump that the city decided, oh, we're just gonna put dirt and grass on this. And so his church has undertook the process of healing this land, and it's going to require people coming with bulldozers to bulldoze the top and get all the garbage out of there, recycle, dispose of it properly, renew the soil, heal the soil, plant native species. It's a whole project. And what Dave is discovering is that in order to do this, he and the church have to work with all these community partners. And while they're doing it, they can talk about the concept of redemption in such literal ways. It's creating these community relationships and modeling how to heal very literally in ways that help us understand healing in more spiritual senses too. He's also a runner. So one of the ways they're raising money for this is having fun runs. And that has also been a huge community builder. Okay, another one. This is a church in Granville, Michigan near me. And they have decided what they're going to do is three things: outdoor discipleship, refugee ministry, and disability ministry. So they have narrowed their mission to these things, all out of their faith. And outdoor discipleship is the one that's super fun. Refugee ministry, of course, refugee, refugia, those are related words, including people with disabilities, creating a safe space for them. But one of the things that's very fun about this church is they are doing citizen science as a church. So their youth group goes in the stream behind their church and does science. They do macroinvertebrate studies. They've had to learn how to do this. They have their Sunday school with their kids outside year round in their little winter coats in the winter. They are really working to get connection with place, their specific place, into their church practices. Here's one I just had the privilege of visiting in Hawaii. Yeah, I know, it was rough. It was rough. First Presbyterian of Honolulu. About 15 years ago, they wound up moving out of Honolulu proper for various reasons, and they bought this golf course. It's a great story. So they wound up with like a clubhouse and a golf course, but it was a poorly functioning golf course. And so they decided they were going to rewild part of it. So that's what they're in the process of now. They're working with many partners, including these are other Christian people who are creating a kalo, which is a taro farm, and a fish pond, all in the same watershed. And what they're doing is creating a community space where people can connect with traditional Hawaiian cultural practices, create community with each other, learn about Hawaiian ecological history, and actually heal this land. It's full of invasives, it's full of pesticides and fertilizers. So they're healing this land with the partnership of a horticulturalist and other amazing people they just happen to have in the church, and also community partners. And this is extremely meaningful for Native Hawaiians who have this intense history of colonization. Finally, a final example here, Plaster Creek Stewards, which is a project of my university that involves education and research, community education, research, and actual renewing of the watershed. Plaster Creek is in our watershed. It is one of the most polluted streams in Michigan for various reasons, mainly industrial effluents. And so this is a great example of finding refugia right where you are, making shelter right where you are. That's called in situ refugia in the biology world. So they're doing watershed work. They're literally planting natives, and this is a park that they sort of fix the way the stream goes through it to slow it down, to use native plants to purify the stream. But they're also doing a lot of community outreach, including with more vulnerable populations. And one of the things that's great about this project is it's ongoing. It's been around for 15 or 20 years. And the way that the leaders think about it is that it's reconciliation ecology. It's all about relationship. It's not just like fixing the stream. It's about repairing this long legacy of disenfranchisement, land theft, all of these things. So they're taking into account all aspects of how the stream got this way and being very intentional about healing those relationships. All of this is very local. And of course, Refugia work is also about systemic change. So advocacy groups are crucial. Going upstream, personal virtue is very important. Communal virtue is important. But yes, we have to change systems and change relationships. So to sum up, a couple things we can notice about this whole Refugia idea. It focuses on the small, and yes, that's not enough. However, one of the cool things about Refugia in biological settings is that these small places are not insignificant. And I think that's very encouraging as we struggle with feeling overpowered. We understand, I think, that global problems are experienced as local realities. So we have to think about particular mitigation and adaptation for right where we are. This is true in nature too. And think of our local projects, as the BTS Center calls, small experiments with radical intent. I think that's a really great way to describe it. And the good news is that human beings have great powers of connection that are a lot harder to do in nature. We can connect across time and space just like we're doing right now. Well, time's a little different, but we can connect across space in ways like what we're doing right now that nature can't do as well. So we can create those Refugia corridors between our small experiments. And one of the joys of doing this work has been seeing that happen, seeing these networks appear. And so we have to think about network ecology, that we do our Refugia work locally, but we're thinking about ourselves as nodes in a network and thinking about our faith communities as nodes in community networks. And that is how ecosystems renew, through networks. So if you think about mycorrhizal networks underneath the forest soil, the networks of roots and fungus that keep soil healthy and allow the passage of nutrients among the plants, among the species even. That's what we have to think about. This is just a beautiful artwork by a friend of mine that represents this. Maybe some of you have heard the word solophilia. So it's a made up word, it's fairly new. It's by an Australian philosopher. And it simply means having enough love that we care about the places where we live. Solophilia, the love to do the work. So just a couple reminders. Refugia, presume crisis. It's a way of facing the reality that we are in crisis. Refugia are for times of disturbance. Small is not insignificant, and sadly, they don't always survive. So there's a sense where our Refugia, it's not a sure path to Shangri-La. It is faithful effort and intentional hope. If they grow, if they last, they persist, they grow through networks, and they are very particular. So I realize let's see, how are we doing on time? Oh, a couple more minutes. Okay, so how to begin? How to begin? And I want to begin on that question with thinking about our emotional places, where we are emotionally. I think it's vital to acknowledge in your community, maybe do some work around this. Where are we emotionally? And we might all be at different places. You might have sorrow, you might have anger, you might have longing. Certainly we have fear. Some people are just more brainy than others and think through, logic. But all of this, we have to find through each of these starting places our love for place. So Kevin, thank you for reading that passage in the book. I was just feeling such an ache right now as you read, because I haven't been out to the lake in a little while. And that was where my love began, for the connection to place. And there's all kinds of ways to find that love. But none of these other things, none of these other feelings are going to be productive without that love at the center. And as far as practically as communities, where do we start? Where can you go next? I'm trying to identify some pathways just to make this legible for people. So there might be more than these. These are kind of groupings that I've been experimenting with, but I put worship and preaching at the top simply because I want to emphasize that meaning making aspect that faith communities can do, because other communities can do these other things too. The way we practice education and formation in our faith communities is really essential right now. We can't do things the same old way, because it's not the same old time. Resilience planning, and that's very particular to where you are. Are you, as a member of your community, helping to plan for resilience for the next hurricane? Can you? How can you? How are you going to use your buildings and grounds to help people connect with place, to be a community refugia space? What partnerships are you building for the work of justice in your community? So these are all pathways, and you could group them different ways. And I think what has to happen is a kind of discernment process. Where is your community just emotionally, and what are your assets and skills? So I'm good friends with the fabulous people at the BTS Center, which is in Maine, Portland, Maine. It used to be Bangor Theological Seminary. Now they're called the BTS Center. It's endowment-based research and faith formation group. They resource other churches and leaders. And you don't have to read this whole detailed slide, but they've kind of been experimenting with these discernment tools for faith communities, and they're really useful. So these are this is just sort of one kind of, what would you call it? Taxonomy, maybe, of where churches and faith groups might be. Maybe you're at point A, where your folks are really just thinking about climate as a technical and policy crisis, and your worldview about the relationship between people and the more than human creation is kind of, yes, we're in charge, we're the most important, we get to use things as we want, that's just the way it is. Anyway, you can see there's a sort of progress from A to B in a sense. And the progress, what they're trying to do at the BTS Center is really think about that spiritual transformation piece. So by the time you get to C, the idea is to think about the climate crisis, and I would add, indeed, the whole crisis convergence we're dealing with, as a spiritual crisis at root that is manifesting in many forms, but it has these spiritual roots. And the sort of addressing of that involves this kinship with reciprocity with the rest of creation. So anyway, this is just one sort of in-process draft tool that one group is using to kind of help faith groups go through this discernment process. So I'll conclude with just a few moments of, I don't know, little encouragement, I guess. And that is, and this is, I found this too, even amid, despair and such discouragement and despondence, doing something, action, leads to hope and community and joy and transformation. Sometimes we need to do the action before we can experience the transformation. And that's just human nature. And I think it's a good idea to remember. So I have a couple of great quotes here, one of them from Kathleen Dean Moore, one of them from Willie James Jennings, who's an incredible scholar. Hope as a discipline to which God calls us. And then the paradox of hope, that eventually when you act, when you work out of commitment and love, you wind up with this kind of defiant clarity. And that is what we need right now. And then I'll conclude with Jim Antal, who's a United Church of Christ pastor who's been in this business for a long time of climate advocacy. I love the way he talks about this moment as a time of communal vocation. So this call to address the climate crisis is a communal call, a universal call. It places this inescapable moral claim on our generation and on every one of us. So our job is to understand how to discern this time and to discern our call in it as communities of faith. And I'll end there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deborah. That was a wonderful presentation. I mean, I hung on every word. You spoke with clarity and purpose, and I think everybody in the audience got picked up on that. Absolutely. So if you're willing, we were thinking of having up to 10 minutes of questions and answers from the audience, if you'd be willing to answer those. So does anyone here have any questions or comments that they'd like to say about Deborah's presentation? I think, hold on a sec, we've got David here. Chuck, can I carry this back to him to save time? Okay, here, Dave, I'll come to you.
Can you hear me?
Oh,
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
So,
I'm going to take my notes with me. Where's the camera? So, Deborah, okay, let me talk to you and talk to the camera. I'm a retired college professor also, and you spoke about your contact with young people and their feeling that they lack this spiritual depth that helps them confront these crises. I have 4 children also, none of whom have children, and they've all said they don't anticipate bringing children into the world because of what they're facing in the future and what their children would face. So how do you, yet at the same time, they're highly suspicious of these, what you call sense of transcendence, big narratives of hope and meaning that I, as a Christian, refer to the Bible, to the Hebrew scriptures and the New Testament, highly suspicious of organized religion. How do you point them toward that sense of spiritual depth?
Oh, what a great question. What a hard question. The young people I work with have generally been raised in a faith tradition, largely white evangelical, not exclusively, but largely. Some of them have this kind of more traditional Reformed bent. So I would say, for them, their anxieties are real, but a lot of their churches aren't addressing them at all. A lot of their churches are pretending that, either all is well, or they're just saying, oh, God will fix it. And there's a kind of attempt at faithful piety there, in the sense of, yes, we trust God, we believe in providence, the idea of providence. God has a plan, God is in control. And, that's a kind of gesture of piety, but young people are saying, oh yeah, well, I'm looking around and it sure doesn't look like it. So yeah, fair. And so I think the first thing to do with young people is address the fact that things are pretty rough, because they can see, and to have a faith resource that's more than just, oh, it'll be fine, God is in control, God will fix it. Because you just look at history and you say, there's a lot of things God chose not to fix, if you have this high view of of providence. So why? And now we've arrived, of course, at the central and unanswerable question of theodicy. Why do people suffer? Why do good people suffer? So I think then you have to show young people that throughout the tradition of faith, it has meant a lot of people suffering amid crisis. If you read the scripture, there's not a lot of everything's great in scripture, These are people who found hope in God from within dark times. The scriptures are full of it. So to put before young people this sense of, yes, we know, and we are seeking God amid this. And then, I think these Refugia spaces, to hold out this vision of God's intention of healing and restoration, this is God's intention. This is God's dream for this creation, a full redemption. All things reconciled to God's self, we say from the New Testament. To hold that out and say what we need to do is be witnesses to that vision, to that dream. And we may not see it. It's not, I mean, the myth of progress is really tough. It's our dominant mythology, especially in the United States, our myth of progress. Things are just getting better. But young people are reaching an age where they realize, I'm not so sure about that. Things seem to be getting worse. And we have to say, nevertheless, the creator of this universe means us well. And our job is to, by our actions, create images, create small spaces where we see that redemptive work happening. So, you know, I don't have really a total answer. I think the other thing young people need besides that larger spiritual witness is a sense of actual information. So for me, the young students that I work with, they're worried about climate because they like hear rumors, but they don't know much. So I find myself, you know, doing what you're not supposed to do, which is like going through slides of horrible statistics. But they don't know. They aren't being presented with that information, and they don't necessarily know where to find it. Our information economy is so full of sludge and deception. So just that kind of practical guidance, and then that sense of, yeah, our faith is not that everything's going to be fantastic. Our faith is that there is a vision of redemption that we are in the process of witnessing. And that is our role, is to witness to this process faithfully and with hope, and to practice virtues within the difficulties. That's the best I can do.
Deborah, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So anyway, that was a real honest and heartfelt answer, and I appreciate it. And it was a good question too. And I'd like to have other questions, but in the interest of time, I think we're running a few minutes behind. I think what we'll do is take a quick 5-minute break while the panel gets in place and things get ready for the panel discussion. We have a good panel here. I'm really big supporters and fans of all these people. So I'm looking forward to this, and we'll see you in about 5 minutes. If you need to use the restrooms, or just go through this door, through the little courtyard into Ron Hall, and there are a couple of restrooms in there, and we'll get started in about 5 minutes. I knew this would happen. I wrote all these questions, and I knew that once people started talking with, you know, the passion and expertise, that they would hit it. So I'm going to pass it on. We'll come back to all of this in a little bit, but I'm going to pass it on to Luke now. And Luke, let's see. Okay. What is, and I think Deborah's already talked a little bit about this, but from your perspective and your study and practice, what is eco-theology? And what is its role in moving us along the path to healing and creating a flourishing world?
Okay, thanks, Kevin. So obviously, eco-theology made up of two words, ecology and theology. And I think to start with ecology, I think it's just important to understand that this is not just one kind of political justice issue, you know, among others. It's really a colleague of mine, Jay McDaniel, calls it the context for all issues, right? Everything is a part of this interdependent, you know, network of life and matter that we're all in it together. So we can't talk about things like, you know, justice and equity and racism and immigration phobia migration is a lot of times spurred on by environmental crisis. So these things all hang together. And I think, so then when we add theology, I would say that theology, of course, the systematic inquiry into the nature of divinity, we can't talk about God as separate from that either. And there is a tendency in certain traditional, especially Western religions, to have God up above, over and above the ecology of the earth. But I am sort of pushing towards a way of understanding divinity as imminent to, threaded throughout, opening up the possibility within the earth systems, cultural, natural, animal, cosmological. So that's the kind of idea. This word ecology, it's good to trace it back to the Greek word oikos. Oikos is the ancient Greek word for household. And the household was where a certain balance of what's coming in, what's coming out. There's reciprocity. You don't take more than you give. And to understand this, have this realization that our entire planet, our biosphere, and I think even further than that, is a household that we need to take care of and think of ourselves. And God is integrated, is a sort of benevolent sort of guide, a centerless center of that household. So instead of thinking about divine power over dominion, and again, like another colleague of mine says, God's, in Genesis, God's command to have dominion over the earth, that's probably the only one that humanity has ever followed successfully, right? The rest of them, forget it. We did that, we nailed that one, right? But to think instead of power over and omnipotence, to think of this word amipotence, which has to do with the power of love and persuasion and compassion. And for me, divine power is about two things. It's about honest awareness and knowing that is taking account for what is, and what is needs to be grieved and needs to be witnessed for the horror that it is. So there's the honesty, but then there's love, compassion, and not shame, blame, scolding. Grief, yes, right? But I think God calls us forward, and the Bible, again, filled with passages, not that the Bible's the only text they use, but of people in crisis for whom God has opened a space, a refugia, a space of possibility that invites us towards new forms of being a self in relation, instead of a self as an individuated, separated entity, into an awareness of the common weave, this interdependent weave of destiny that we're woven in together, to use Martin Luther King's words. So, yeah.
Well done, Luke. Thank you. Appreciate it. And now let's go to Beth. I am really enjoying listening to all of you so far. I mean, I'm having a good time. So Beth Remmes from Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. Beth also recently, in the last couple of years, got her master's degree in biomimicry. So Beth, I'd like you to start and kind of tell people a little bit about what that even is and how it can be used.
So biomimicry, the kind of official definition, is a conscious emulation of nature's genius. A shorter one is innovation inspired by nature, or if you forget, just break the word apart: eco, life, and mimic, copy. So we're copying what life does. It's really a mindset shift from where we are now. A lot of time, we look at nature and think, oh, what can we extract, or what is it providing me? And this is a different way of seeing nature, and it's asking, what can we learn from nature? So before designing anything, you're looking and say, oh, okay, what would nature do here? What wouldn't nature do here? And how would nature do it? Again, it's seeing nature as our teacher. In biomimicry, we say model, mentor, and measure is how we view nature. So in terms of an ecological civilization, Debra had mentioned it too, But in nature, there's no waste, right? You go into a forest, there's not a pile of garbage. Like everything is part of a closed loop system. So thinking about when we design something, our current model is a linear model. We take it, we make it, and we waste it. But in nature, things are loops and they're closed circles. And so it's thinking, okay, well, what can I use? And nature also, by the way, is resource efficient. That's one of life's principles. So if I'm going to make something, can I use something that already exists? Can I keep it in the system? Once it's done, what does the end of its life look like? What else can it nourish? Like those leaves on the forest floor. And then I think the other kind of maybe bigger question, or what it looks like in ecological civilization, is the goals of the system. If someone just came here from another planet and looked around and be like, what are the goals here? What are people trying to do? Probably you would all say profits, make more money. That's our goal of the system, seemingly, that we are in. An ecological civilization based on nature's principles is, how do we create conditions conducive to life? That's what life does. All the life that has survived and thrived here for 3.8 billion years, that is the emergent property of life's principles. Life has created conditions conducive to life.
Well, thank you, Beth. I appreciate it. Take maybe just a couple of minutes and talk about Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, who we partner with here at the Unitarian Church. Educate people just a little bit about that.
Yes. So we work with all different faith communities to inspire and equip communities to first organize. We do that through green teams. So a lot of communities have some sort of small ministry. So if there's energy and interest in a green team or environmental group, we work with you to help you do that. We implement practical climate solutions. So we do energy audits to save money and energy, solar, water programs to save our, not as much water waste, zero waste programs. So really those like practical things. And then the third piece of it, we do a lot of advocacy work on climate change, environmental justice, and community resilience. Resilience hubs, which I think maybe we'll talk a little more about later.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you so much. And we worked with them in the last few years. We have insulated the sanctuaries and a lot of the doors back in the offices in the back area. And we also are looking now into the possibility of getting solar panels. We've worked with them on programs. So I really like working with Beth personally and with GIPL as an organization. It's a wonderful organization. So now we're going to go into some general questions, which any of you can offer to say, I'll take that one. And people can take, more than one person can take a question. You can say, I'd like to address that from another answer. Or from another perspective. And I was going to ask this question toward the end, but I think I'm going to start right away. And even though I said anybody can pitch in, I'm going to direct it right to Kris. My question is, does nature have rights?
Yes, I do believe that nature has rights to protection and not solely to be managed for our own benefit. It brings it back to just that concept that everything is connected. Everything affects everything else. And how many times have we heard, if you destroy the earth, you destroy yourselves, even though earth will probably end up being fine after we're gone. But a colleague of mine, initially she started working with turtles, but since then she's gone on to just amazing things. She's done work with defending rights to nature. She works in Panama and defends ecosystems as entities that have a right not to be exploited themselves, rather than just having like environmental protections which dictate how much or how little an ecosystem can be exploited. So she works in Panama and she's legislated for rights. And Panama now joins Ecuador and Bolivia in having those rights. And they've actually had a lot of success in stopping mines in Bolivia and Ecuador.
Yeah, and I had just actually read recently, maybe this week, New Zealand also gave rights to a river and to a mountain.
Excellent.
Specifically. And so this idea of nature having rights is one that's beginning to grow. And I think it's going to make a fundamental change in our culture over time. I mean, so many things that we take for granted now, people 200 years ago thought were absurd. But and I think that's going to be the same case when it comes to the rights of nature. So thank you, Kris. Yeah. Absolutely. Here, you can use mine.
So yeah, any practice that can expand the circle of that which we're able to love and care for is going to be helpful. So using expanding our understanding of rights, absolutely. If this works, to the extent that this works, go with it. And this is a logic we already kind of intuitively understand because it's a part of our constitution and our kind of civilizational ethics. However, the problem with it is that it does presuppose a kind of individuality and a sameness, the idea that we're these little atomic units, each of which has equal rights. And I don't think that's exactly how ecology functions. Reciprocity, yes, but what any given entity takes and gives in a given system is profoundly different. And what they're able to take and give in a system is profoundly different. So it can get to be a kind of heavy-handed and awkward sort of ethical framework in certain situations. And so I just want to put in that little, little worry that it might not always take us as far as we need to go.
Yeah.
Thank you. Danielle, you want to bitch on that one? Okay. You did a good job. All right, good. All right, good. Do you want to comment? Oh, I thought I said Deborah, but yeah. Oh, Deborah, do you want to comment? Yes, I was thinking of Beth. Okay, sorry.
Oh, well, I'm just thrilled to, make the acquaintance of each of you. One of the joys of doing this work, whatever it is I'm doing, is the encouragement of seeing people like the four of you and all of you in this room doing this work with resolve and with passion and with skill. It's amazing. I want to thank Luke. I tend to go to like the theology philosophical part. So I want to thank Luke for your caution about transcendence. And I agree with that. And I think we need to like lean into Christian panentheism or, for so long, there's been this kind of allergy to any kind of divine immanence. And I think this is the moment where we say, yeah, no, God is present in creation. That's part of orthodoxy. And to get people comfortable with the idea of the divine presence, and to not absolutely freak out when anybody says something to that effect, which happens in my circles, maybe not so much in yours. And then, yeah, the rights of nature movement, it's very interesting. I think it will be, in some contexts, a useful tool. As you say, it has some kind of problems at its root, which is that we only value things when they have rights. And, rights is a kind of reductive answer to treating each other badly. And so somehow underneath that, and I think our faith traditions have this claim at their heart too, which is that the created world is valuable and meaningful apart from human beings. And to acknowledge that value is one of the noblest things we can do as human beings. So it's kind of the foundational philosophical principle behind stop just abusing this earth. So yes, if rights of nature is a legal tool we have to use, fine. But I think you're right, Luke, that underneath that, there's this kind of foundational idea that needs to be established so that we almost don't even need these kind of desperate legal tools.
If I'm on it. Yeah, I'm on. Good. All right. Thank you. Those are great answers. And I think it's an important topic. Yes, Raven. Could I ask you to hold those to the end, because we're going to have a question and answer session. Would that be okay? Yeah, I'm sorry. So I make that clear. We'll have a question and answer session at the end. Thanks, though. I appreciate it. Look forward to it. Okay, so Deborah gave some examples of things in Michigan that are happening with faith communities. So my question to each of you, from the perspective of the work that you do, is what practical things can faith communities do locally in action in connection with the larger community to address the effects of the climate crisis, ecological degradation on our citizens and our environment? In other words, can we become people of Refugia, and how? So who would like to start with that? Okay.
In Deborah's talk, she showed talked about advanced regeneration. So like the little seedlings that are planted that only then sprout after a disruption. Maybe there's a gap in the canopy, so now they get more light and they can grow. So similarly, there's something in nature called the adaptive cycle that I work with, and it's the same idea. It's like, in nature, in economics and society, there is this high growth phase. Like think of a meadow, and you're gonna get all those really fast growing plants. And then eventually succession makes its way into a forest where things get, there's a lot of diversity, which is great. But over time, a lot of the debris builds up and it gets kind of really tight and constricted. It's called conservation phase, which you think is a good thing, but actually it's collecting a lot of the resources. And then inevitably there's a disruption, usually like a fire. And then that gives way then to those seeds that were planted. And some of them maybe haven't even started growing. Some of them maybe only release like in a fire, like the jack pine, it's called serotiny, like that heat melts the wax and the seed will come out. And we see it in economies like the .com and kind of now AI and socially. And so I was at an immersion program about this, and the story that I want to get to in this is that we can start right now at that reorganization phase. Like we don't have to wait for the disruption to plant those seeds that will then emerge. And so like working with resilience hubs, we are hoping to have those in faith communities. So yes, that they can provide a shelter during a storm or refrigeration for medicines or cooling and things like that. But really the most important part, and you don't need to have any of those things to be able to do this, is looking at your community, looking what programming they would need to eventually, when something happens that would help them, maybe not even just bounce back, but bounce forward. So what programming would that look like? And that's going to be different for any community. It could be, we want to know what to-go kits look like if we have to evacuate. I want to know if I have the right insurance. So starting those programming now and planting those seeds that can then come forth when needed, I think is a really wonderful thing we can do to help. And then just one more thing, and I'll pass it, but studies around resilience, the top, I don't know reason, but the quality that creates a resilient community is social cohesion. More than anything else, it's not resources, it's how well we are connected to each other. It's, I know to go check on so-and-so because they may have an accessibility issue and cannot get out. I need to go pick them up. It's saying, I know that they need their medicine refrigerated. So it's that. So, and we do that really well as faith communities. So keep doing that and building that social cohesion.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I would like to add to that. I think that, she made a great point earlier about how do we create conditions conducive to life, right? And I think when we think on it on a large scale, and I'm responding to all the questions from a systemic space as pertains to equity and justice, is that what creates our society, our policies and initiatives, right? Or the lack thereof. And the inequities that we see in our society today are a result of past policies and exacerbated by current policies or decisions. And so when I think as people of faith and how we can be a part of creating a society that's conducive for life for all, that we have to hold our governments, local, state, and federal, accountable to decisions and policies that's conducive for all, right? And the faith community is a large part of the society. And I think it's important for us to participate in ways that hold our systems, our governments accountable to decisions that is conducive for all, and not for just people to survive, but to thrive, right? If we think about, I'm going back to low resource communities because those are the most marginalized. When we think about, healthy foods and things like that, in order for us to get like organic foods, at some point you have to be at a certain income level to think about organic, right? If you are in a low resource community, most people, a study shows that in Atlanta, most people in low resource communities are getting their foods from convenience stores, which don't have, produce. Although there's a Dollar General where I live, and that's the first store I've ever seen sell produce. It was amazing to see. I was surprised. There's tomatoes and salads. I was like, wow, at a Dollar General. But that is a means of bringing into a community that is somewhat low resource, a way of getting fresh fruits and vegetables, right? So my plea is that as people of faith, that we are a large part of our communities, and in the communities that we are in, it's important for us to hold our leaders accountable to equitable policies and decisions. And it's important for us to really advocate for that, because if we don't, then people are really marginalized, and that thriving aspect of life is not lived by all. And there are organizations that are doing that. And on a large scale, it's important that we be a part of that process.
That was beautifully said. Thank you, Danielle. Absolutely.
So just to think specifically about the contribution that faith communities, can make. There's so many of us, I think, who care about this massive turning, this great turning, this crisis, is a sense of despair and fear. And I think there's a tendency to numb out. I feel it happen in myself. Like sometimes it's overwhelming to think about. And I think one of the important roles that a faith community can do is help give the nourishment to expand our ability to feel with the earth, feel with the suffering that is a part of this great turning. And what happens when people die? You seek out a church. Even people who don't go to church, so often when their loved ones pass, so this is a place where we know how to grieve, and we do it well. And the ability to grieve allows us to feel what we need to feel, and to give radical acceptance to what is happening. We cannot change the past. So I think when we get caught up in sort of indignation, self-righteousness, shame, and blame, that can go in a kind of hazardous direction, and that can get us, we just don't want to feel that way. Those don't nourish life. Those don't, that's not what life does to grow. And so I think spiritual practices in particular can really enhance our ability to just radically accept this great darkness that we're entering into, that it might be a place of refugia, a place where new life might spring out of those ashes. So yeah.
Well, thank you. That's a great segue too, because my next question is, all of you are up here because you play important roles in our community and local landscapes. You have one foot in that world, but you each also have a foot in a faith practice or a faith community. So I wanted to ask, what role faith practices have for you personally in your life to help you take that spiritual energy out into the world? Who wants to take that one first? I know it's an easy one.
So I'm a member of this church, the UUCS, and I do try to live by the 6 UU values of equity, generosity, interdependence, justice, pluralism, and transformation, all surrounding love. And in my work and action in the world, the 3 that resonate with me the strongest, of course, is interdependence, where we honor the interdependent web of all existence, acknowledge our place in it, and covenant to protect the earth and all beings from exploitation. Also equity, every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worth. And justice, we work to be a diverse, multicultural community where we all thrive. And can I back up for just 30 seconds?
Please do.
To the last question? This is just a plug. But you had asked about how the faith communities can work with larger communities in producing Refugia and working to produce this better world. And I just think that we've got 2 great examples of organizations on stage that do that. GIPL, that works with addressing environmental issues, and JUST, which addresses justice issues in Savannah. So I think that's a great place to start if you're looking for for Refugia.
Thank you. Anybody else want to handle that question about your personal practices?
Personally, I would say prayer and meditation have been really helpful over the years to just so that I even know what that center feels like, so that I'm also very aware when I'm pulled off that center and the breathing to get back to the center. And my home church is the Unity Church. We have principles too. And the fifth one is through thoughts, words, and actions, we live the truth we know. It's not really about like the promise of what it will bring me or what will happen to me if I don't do it. The object is to just go live it. And I think that, and combined with, I'm a facilitator for the work that reconnects, and Joanna Macy is a Buddhist philosopher, and talks a lot about non-attachment. So again, the living the truth I know without the attachment to like the result of that, I think has really helped me over my life, because I think if I only did something because I knew or had to work out that way, and then if it didn't, I just don't even know what my life would look like. So just being able to do something because I know it's what I'm supposed to be doing is enough. Yeah.
And Danielle, I guess you both want to say something, which is cool. Go ahead, Danielle, and then we'll get Luke.
Sure. Could you just repeat the question one more time?
I just wanted to know a little bit if you were willing to share about your personal spiritual practice or the practices you use to help keep the energy and the drive and inspiration to do the work you do.
Sure. I guess there are two things, and I'm gonna try to keep this brief. One, I come from a Christian tradition, that espouses, love as the foundation of all. And I think when I picture what love is and how I love myself, I create an environment for myself to thrive and to enjoy life. And if I see people around me or communities that are not experiencing that, in some ways, I'm like, how can I say I love these communities if I'm not trying to do the same for them? If the Christian tradition of loving your neighbor as yourself, right? And so creating that environment for others. So that's kind of where my drive comes from. My drive also comes from, and I'm gonna keep this brief, my genesis in this country started as an undocumented immigrant. Mm-hmm. And although that's somewhat not the case right now, the only reason I was able to really survive and thrive during that time period was the church community that I was in. And those people like loved me and ensured that I went to college and ensured that I was going to be a productive citizen. Mm-hmm. And seeing that displayed in my life, I was like, there's no way I'm not going to live and do the same for others, right? And so that is kind of also what fosters. I saw love in action, and I want to live that till the day I die, right? And I think if I'm to love my neighbor as myself, I can do all that is possible to create systems for not just one person, but for many people to thrive. And so that's my story.
Thank you, Danielle. I think Luke wants to say something.
Yeah, I just want to give a quick shout out to sort of a little more of a left field answer to this question. One of the people that was considered or asked to be a part of this panel was a guy named Hunt Priest, who runs an organization called Ligare. And he's trying to cultivate awareness about what's called the psychedelic renaissance, mostly in the context of mental health. But I think for Hunt and for me, psychedelic medicine can be one way that can really enhance our awareness of being more than an ego, more than just this encapsulated box of skin, that actually our presence, who we are, is a interdependent, is what Thich Nhat Hanh calls interbeing. We live beyond ourselves, and we live as more than ourselves. And there's something about this particular type of medicine, which of course is an ancient spiritual religious practice used in countless different religious, and cultural rituals. And there has a long history of calling us back to something that there's more than just human beings here, and we are more than just who we think we are. And being able to just identify with the more than the ego, it is an incredibly powerful enhancement of that awareness, and I think it can really do a lot of healing work. So, little shout out for that. I think faith communities and chaplaincy should have more involvement in that work, because I think it just brings, it literally creates a religious experience, even for people who don't have any religious identifications. So, just mention that.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Beth.
I'll just add one thing to that is that I have had those experiences through just meditation. So if you think, oh, well, I abstain, like I don't feel that, you can get there through meditation. I have some moments where I have just felt like held and bathed in that pure love, the essence of the universe. So just want to give another shout out for that as well.
Good. Thank you, Beth. Yes.
It just takes a little longer and sitting in meditation. You got to get through that monkey mind first.
Very good. Yeah. Thank you, Beth. And thank you, Luke. I mean, we are a Unitarian church, right? We haven't, so. Okay. I actually, beg pardon? Deborah, yes, that's a good idea. Thanks, Ed. Would you?
Oh, sure. So prayer, yes. And very honest prayer, like whatever, saying that whatever to God and being very honest. The Psalms are helpful to me, especially some that are, there are some particular Psalms right now that are about not worrying when the wicked prosper, which I don't know. I don't know if I can do it, but there it is. And for me, worship has actually been a really significant way to uphold and motivate and return me to center. I go to a church that has really, really good worship. It's a very artistic church, so our worship is very embodied. Not so much that we're dancing around or anything, but there's art everywhere. Preaching, I think these days has just been electric, because the people who preach at my church are saying things like they are. And I would say for me, the ritual of the Eucharist or the Lord's Supper or communion is very meaningful. We stand in a circle and we pass the elements. And over the years, that is this moment of transcendence, of community in the presence of God, seeing these other people around this circle that I've known for decades. So that community, that long haul community that Danielle was talking about, that we have seen each other through a lot over the decades. And that is very strengthening. I'll say one more thing, if you don't mind, just in response to Danielle's reminder about the need for systemic policy change. I don't want folks to think this whole Refugia idea is like, oh yeah, we create these cute little spaces and all this horrible machination goes on above our heads. Meanwhile, we're just having a good time in these cute little spaces, because without those bigger systemic changes, those spaces won't survive. So I just want to acknowledge the truth of that, as Danielle so eloquently described it, and say that Refugia is always a response to crisis and a way to keep people going while we work on those big issues together, and to help people feel agency and purpose and a relative safety while we deal with these powerful forces that we may or may not have huge influence on. So yeah, I always say to people, look, you need the local for sure. And right now we really need to work on local spaces. We generally have more power to influence local spaces. But at the same time, be advocating in those huge, huge systemic ways too. So thank you for that reminder, Danielle.
We are, first of all, thank you, Deborah. Thank you, the panel. This has been such a wonderful panel. We had a lot more questions, but because they're so knowledgeable and articulate, you know, we had a great conversation up here. So I appreciate it. Let's give them all a hand. So we're running a little bit over, but I do want to at least acknowledge Raven and maybe have time for one more question. And then I have a couple of announcements. And then Deborah, I asked her to give like a closing statement. So this will just take a few more minutes. Raven, do you want the microphone?
For the recording.
You do need a microphone. Okay.
Okay, so what I wanted to comment when we're talking, I want to go back to the rights of nature. And of course, what immediately came to mind was the indigenous peoples all over the planet. And we're probably mostly familiar with Native Americans, but in work that I've done in different parts of the world, it's the same story as we know. And that is that these people recognized, let's say, the creator, God, whatever you want to call it, in the trees and the animals and the water and so on. And there's a sense of despair for these people because they felt that they are the stewards of the land and they have not been able to protect the land. And so there's a level of grief all over the planet that's very, very powerful, largely because the Western quote unquote civilized world considers all these people second-class citizens anyway. So what do they know? You know, so we still have a lot to learn from people and of these cultures. And I think that really needs to be emphasized over and over and over again because they're so easily forgotten. They're so easily pushed aside. And when you're talking about Colombia and Bolivia and with Ecuador, I mean, these are places where people are respected for their beliefs. That was my first comment. The other, in terms of the rights of the planet, my great niece is going to Occidental in Los Angeles and studying to be an environmental lawyer. And what I was wondering, maybe Deborah, you have the answer to this or someone else, are there a lot of other university programs that are giving young people the opportunity to become environmental lawyers to protect the rights of nature?
Does anyone know about that?
I do know that Pachamama Alliance is working on it quite a bit, and they have some legal teams working on rights of nature. So I might start there and see which organizations they represent, which firms. And then if you don't mind, I just might want to comment on your first, because I really do want to give credit. I grew up in a place called Irondequoit, New York, which sounds Native American, right? Because it is. It was part of the Haudenosaunee territory, specifically the Seneca people. So I was on unceded territory, but they were very much still alive and present. I went to nature camp as a little kid, and we had elders talk. And I remember them saying, you know, when we would we go on a hunt, we gave gratitude. We use every bit of the animal. Nothing went to waste. We are in relationship. We are kin. And I was maybe like 8, and I was like, that makes so much sense. Like, and I could never see the world another way. Like, I knew that something was off the way that we were living. I would cry when I would see garbage dumps or, you know, see slaughters of animals. And so, yes, Raven, thank you. For giving me a chance to acknowledge, like, that's how I got involved in this work, because I heard that indigenous worldview, and I was like, that's the one.
Thank you, Beth. Yeah, Heidi. Yes, I forgot, you do need a microphone.
So, yeah, we in our family, we have been recycling and trying to be more conscientious about, you know, not getting plastic bags at the supermarket, taking our own bags, and just to limit waste to a minimum. And I don't find it particularly hard, even though our kids, and I don't understand why, but they complain that, you know, we're hippies and we're just you know, it's so much harder to reduce waste than to just, you know, continue business as usual. So, and I get really aggravated about all the plastic bags at the supermarket in particular, and everything is wrapped in plastic, and we try to buy fruit, you know, just individual fruits, not in plastic bags. But it's still a struggle, and sometimes you wonder, you know, does it even matter? But what I really want to get to is how, so how brave are you, or how do you stand for your beliefs and protecting the environment when you are in groups or gatherings where people don't give a rat's ass about that. So one example, for Thanksgiving, we went to our usual family gathering, and it was at my cousin's daughter's house, and there were 20 plus people there. And I really felt uncomfortable because all they had was plastic, cutesy plastic plates with silver rims, and plastic cups, and plastic cutlery. And I just felt so uncomfortable. And, but you know, what do you do? What am I supposed to, you know, lecture them or, and you can't really, I don't really think, I mean, unless they're living under a rock, you know, how can you not know that this is very harmful, these practices? So I don't even know whether lecturing or informing them, you know, would do any good. I recently bought a foldable spork that I carry in my purse for situations like that. And I used it the other day, but then you still need a plate, which I don't know whether there might be foldable plates too, but, and then, you know, for cups, I always take my water bottle with me. But how, you know, how do you act or carry yourself when you are in situations that are not like, you know, our church or our green team where everybody's on the same page? Do you just ignore it, or do you try to reform or people? Well, I don't, whoever wants to.
Go ahead. No.
No, that is a good question, because a lot of times you do get push, or even if it's not pushback, you are in situations where there simply is, there's nothing that you can do about it. But I just try to lead by example more than try and reform anybody, I guess. Like at my house, we'll lead off, like, we don't have a lot of plastic that we're throwing out. We try to minimize plastic bags. We do all that. When we go shopping with people, we'll bring our own bags. It's really just what, a lot of times I think it's what people see you doing. And if it's different from them, they're going to be like, oh, what are you doing there? And I think it's all a teachable moment.
Can I add
Thank you.
something? Can I add something?
You know, one of the signs of, oh, yes, Deborah, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. You know, Georgia and Michigan are similar in that we bump up against people who have very different views all the time in Michigan and Georgia. And I think you're right. You know, no one likes a scold. So you going tisk at the family party is not going to help anything. So yes, modeling, but also saying, so I do it this way and it's great. I love it. It's great. And I think the other thing to just understand is that, yes, plastics are a problem. Absolutely. But us feeling guilty about our plastic use is, you know, sort of the businesses that continue to pump out plastics externalizing the guilt of their practices onto us. So we just have to realize it's not because of us. It's because there are profits in plastic, that plastic keeps. So that, and then also, you know, plastic is a problem. Yes, we need to reduce waste. Yes, all of that. But also the most urgent things right now are clean energy transition and land use reform, just in terms of mitigating the climate crisis, clean energy transition and land use reform. And the most practical thing you can do about land use reform is actually not eat so much meat, because meat is extremely, especially beef and lamb, extremely resource thirsty, and that requires land use. So I don't even know what huge percentage of the corn and soy that we grow in this country is fed to animals. So, you know, if you really want to do something that has impact eat less meat, and make that joyful and say, I love this. Vegetarianism's great. And you don't have to be like super purist about it, but just eat a lot less, experiment. And clean energy transition too. I have solar panels, we have a heat pump, we have 2 electric cars, and it's awesome. And I am happy to tell anybody how amazing it is and how efficient that heat pump is and how our electricity bills in the summer are so much lower because of the heat pump. So that's the kind of thing that really does change people. Make them jealous of what you're doing because it's a more beautiful and meaningful, in a lot of ways, more economically beneficial way to live.
Thank you, Deborah. It's interesting you say that about the meat. We just finished a plant-based diet challenge for the congregation here at the Unitarian Church January. And we wanted to raise awareness among the congregation about the cost to the environment that eating meat has. And that in itself is a practice, like you said, to eat less meat. So thank you for bringing that up. You know, one of the signs of a really good program is that people want to keep the congregation or keep the conversation going. But we've already gone over, and I think we probably should begin to wrap this up. So what I'm going to do, I want to make a few announcements. But first, I want to thank the panel again, because they did a great job. And thank Deborah for the amazing presentation. This is everything that I thought it would be. And so I thank you all for coming. I'm just really in awe of the conversation that we all had. But I do want to make a few announcements. I want to give some thanks, first of all. I want to thank our audiovisual team, Ed and Lily. This went off without a hitch, and how often does that happen, right? Okay. I want to thank Jessica, who did all of the promoting and marketing material, which was beautifully designed. I want to thank Nancy Arterberry. I don't think is here this morning, but she worked overtime to get the programs out and to help with all of the marketing program locally through the e-blast of the church and the newsletter. So thank you to her. Thank you to Reverend Lisa and our board, led by Steve Hutter, for their support. I want to thank the Green Team for several Green Team members who are here today. I can't remember them all right now, but they helped with the setup. They'll be back there to help to tear down. So I thank our Green Team. We have a great Green Team, and they've accomplished a lot in the 6 years of their existence. So I want to thank Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, who Beth is a representative of. They've been great partners, and they help sponsor this program and provide funding. So thank you, Gipple. And of course, I've already thanked the panel and Deborah. So a few quick announcements. Oh, thank you. This is the kind of thing I like to do, so it's fun. I like to have good conversations, and this is just an extension of that, so that works out. Our Green Team is a member of a larger coalition called the Coastal Interfaith Green Team, and Dave's back there from Asbury. He's the one who's sort of like the de facto leader of that, and he has organized on the 15th of February a cleanup of the Police Memorial Trail. I don't know how many of you know where that is, out there behind Whole Foods is where it starts, kind of, and it's going to be part of the larger Tide to Town bicycle trail. But that in itself is sort of an act of preserving a small area of Refugia. It's a nice little wooded area you can walk through, ride your bike through. On March 1st, we're going to have part of being an activist or working in services to take care of yourself too, or you won't have the resources and the strength to do the work you need to do. So we're going to have a somatic workshop led by Denise Windytree here at the church a month from today on March 1st. That's a Saturday morning from 10 to 11:30. So put that in your calendars. Space is limited. I think only to 20, but you got some handouts about it when you came in today. Let's see, what else is on this here? Oh yeah, and this one other thing. Finally, please join us for refreshments, because we have a lot of them, back in Ron Hall after this, and let's have some conversation and keep it going in the back. And so with that, I will stop talking, and to close the program, I'm going to ask Deborah to make a few closing comments.
Thank you. This has been amazing. I'm thinking about the word gratitude. Grateful for all of you for being here today. Grateful for the panel. Grateful for Kevin and the whole team at the church. Again, you've done this with such exquisite care. So thank you for that. And I'm also thinking about gratitude and joy more broadly as survival tactics. And I'm not good at them. I have to consciously practice gratitude and joy. I tend to be more melancholy. But gratitude and joy, practices of them, are ways of survival, especially when times are harder. And there are many, many people who understand that, including the indigenous people that one of us talked about. And so I want to end with that. And then I'll read a prayer from my discussion guide for the book. So I wrote some prayers, one for each chapter. This is the one for the final chapter. So I'll read that for us to close. God of hope, you promise never to abandon us. Awaken in us divine vision and imagination. We give thanks for all those people who inspire and persist, who dream and work. Sustain us in the ordinary days amid weariness and fear. Bring us to consolation. Amid exhaustion, bring us true rest. Grant us patience and resilience to practice the discipline of hope. Awaken our attention, inflame our wonder, that we might fall in love again and again with this exquisite world for your sake and your glory. Amen.
Learn something, are motivated and inspired to go out and do your part. Thank you.